Good afternoon. My name is Ron Perry, and I'd like to, on behalf of the Friends of the Library, I'd like to welcome you to today's program. And while folks are filing in, I would just like to put in a little plug. You may have seen some of the billboards out on the interstate about the upcoming Puppet Festival. And I'd like to, if you didn't come to the last one, we had it 3 or 4 years ago, I'd like to encourage you to come. It's not just for kids. I mean, I know Americans don't think much of puppet shows, but it's going to be June the 21st through the 23rd. It's going to include folks from China, Germany, Japan, Argentina, and France, as well as the U.S. So if you have time, put that on your calendar and try to make it down. As I was looking for today's program, I was thinking, you know, we have the Puppet Festival coming up, we have the symphony, and who would be interested in turning to things like alcohol and drugs and prostitution? And those seem to be intertwined a lot. I found an article from February 2011 in Focus. I don't know, you probably remember. This was an article, I might embarrass our speaker today, called Becca the Beautiful. Magdalen House and Thistle Farms, inspiring health, beauty, and love. So I was thinking, you know, who would turn to drugs and alcohol and prostitution? Well, if you have health and beauty and love, you probably wouldn't be interested in those things. But just as a little experiment, I think Dr. Wood may appreciate this. What if you had to give up one of those things? You can have as much as you want of the other two. You can have your health and your beauty, but you don't feel like you're loved. Or you can give up your health and keep your... What if you had to give up 2 of those things and you only had one thing to hold on to? And so I pushed that to its extreme. And what if you didn't feel like you had any of these things? You don't have your health, you feel unattractive, and you don't have your love. This is a bleak outlook, and it's above the pay grade for a simple librarian. This is something we need to turn over to the professionals, I think. So fortunately today we have a philosopher and a chaplain from Vanderbilt who can help explain this to us. So help me welcome Dr. David Wood, who puts this together.
I just didn't know, Ron, you were a philosopher. I do have an existentialism, of course, that needs teaching. I'm wondering if maybe I could call on your services next semester. Thanks so much, and to all of you for coming today. The first time I met Becca, she probably doesn't remember this, was at a dinner at Vanderbilt where there were lots and lots of tables and lots of my colleagues, and we came to listen to the testimony of a number of women who had been through or who were going through the Magdalen House experience. And I have to say that was incredibly moving because they told stories of returning to kind of semi-normality after having gone down what for many of them would otherwise have been a one-way street. And I think that is what really moved me most, that we often find ourselves, even in less dire circumstances, having on the wrong side of things that have hit us. And it's very hard to crawl back again, to get back to where we were. And I think what I most admire about Thistle Farm and about Magdalen House is how it makes it possible for people who would otherwise get stuck at the bottom to find their way back again. Now, I'm going to actually read 1 or 2 things from the wonderful website that you can find if you look it up about Becca. And I'm going to quote from her blog, which I found amazing. The Reverend Becca Stevens is an Episcopal priest who serves as chaplain at St. Augustine's at Vanderbilt. And so she's a colleague of mine. And she's founder of Magdalen and Thistle Farms a community and a social enterprise that stands with women recovering from, as Ron said, from prostitution, trafficking, addiction, and living on the streets. And at Magdalene, you can actually live there for 2 years without cost to you as a way of recovering. Thistle Farms, and you've seen some of their products at the table at the back of the dining area, and you should try and go back. I can still smell the cream on my hands.
Perfect.
They employ 40 residents and graduates to manufacture and market and sell all sorts of lovely bath and beauty products right across the world. So, who is Becca Stevens? Well, she's written 8 books. She's been featured on NPR, PBS, CNN, Huffington Post, Southern Living, Christian Century, Victoria Magazine. I forget which one Ron was waving. She's been named Nashvilleian of the Year, Tennessean of the Year by the Nashville Scene and by the Tennessean. She's the youngest and the first female recipient of the University of the South's Distinguished Alumnus Award in 2010, and in the White House even described her as one of 15 champions of change. So this is a lady who is a local living legend, but also someone with national, international presence. She was named the 2011 Social Entrepreneur of the Year in Nashville, here in Tennessee. Got awards from the Frist Foundation and the Academy of Women of Achievement. And she's raised for the various organizations that she supports over $14 million. And if you want to read something of her work, as I say, there are 8 books, and the latest one is beautifully titled Snake Oil, which is not what we're getting tonight, except, well, in your sense, yes, the art of today, the art of healing and truth-telling is the subtitle. Now, despite all these, or as well as all these extraordinary practical things, I have come to realize that Becca Stevens is also a poet. I don't know that she writes poetry, maybe she does, but she writes beautifully. And I was just reading one of her blogs last night, and this is what I read. Winds that are strong enough to turn the leaves, like the issues of sexual violence, are universal in nature, but are experienced uniquely on our individual bodies. The wind is loud enough now that we as a culture realize that the majority of incarcerated women in this country, before they ever see the inside of prison walls, they've already known the backside of anger, the underside of justice, and the short side of what a loving community should be. Before the rains fall, let's move the conversation forward, beyond awareness to concrete action focused on long-term housing, meaningful work, and love without judgment. Let's feel the wind on our cheeks and work toward the healing of women and girls who have already endured enough. Let's remember that globally, we've asked that women continue to settle for bearing the burden of poverty, even as we hold them up as survivors. We can heal villages, and even, I'm sure, villages in Nashville, by healing the women. We can offer a shared trade approach that holds women's social enterprise workers higher in the value chain. We can all come together before the rain falls. I give you Becca Stevens.
Thank you very much. You are very, very kind. And it sounded really good when you read it with your voice. It sounded better than when I read it. So I've been trying to think about what I could say today to old friends and new friends. I'm here today with Tim Fudge, who does a lot of our strategic planning and organizing, and with Katrina, who is our national sales director, a graduate of the program, and national sales director at Thistle Farms, and Ronza. Is there somebody in between y'all? I cannot see it all. Well, there is somebody between you. Okay, hi. And Ronza, who does a lot of, she's just joined the sales team, but she's also going to be working in the new Thistle Cafe. So we are glad to be here. My first question is, does everybody know what Magdalene and Thistle Farms, is it are or is? Is. Yes, yes, yes. If you don't, raise your hand and I'll just start at the beginning. Okay, so a long time ago, back when I was young, we started this community for women who were coming off the streets from prostitution, trafficking, addiction, and all the brokenness. And I am of the camp that it is not a choice, that no one chooses that. No one chooses any disease in their life, and how disease spreads and how it comes over all of us is a mystery, and it's hard, and it's beautiful to find sanctuary where healing from even those diseases happens. And so what I wanted to do today is talk about kind of the mysterious nature of healing in that community and what it's meant for me over the last 15 years. And so as we opened this one house, I was the chaplain at Vanderbilt, and we just invited 5 women to come in and live, just as David was talking about. And I really thought, in a very conventional sense, that what we were doing was a whole bunch of people were coming together. People from Vanderbilt, people from a couple different church communities, people who were a part of another not-for-profit that had owned the house we were going into, that all these people were coming together, and we were in some ways healing the 5 women. And I think conventionally a lot of us think about healing as an act that one person or one community does to another. Somebody is the healer and somebody is the healee. That a doctor performs something and the doctor is the healer and we are being healed. Or a psychologist or a pastor or wherever that happens. And that we think that it's an act of exchange that happens in that sense. And that's really, I think, in my head, the model, unconsciously that I had. That we had these gifts and we were going to offer it to 5 women and they were going to find healing in whatever sense that means. Not like, in this miracle cure kind of, heal, but like, this long journey of restitution and wholeness, for lack of better words, in my life, that we would be a part of that. And in some ways, that has happened. It has been healing for individual women, for sure. I mean, just yesterday, we flew to Mobile, Alabama, to speak at a conference for pastors. And one of the women, 2 of the women always travel with me, and we go and we speak and we talk about hope. And one of the women that was with me was a woman named Sherry, and it was Sherry's very first day to fly. And I didn't know that. I not necessarily would have invited her yesterday to go back and forth to Mobile, Alabama in less than 24 hours. To do 4 flights in less than 24 hours is a lot at 40 years old to have never flown before. And I got to the airport, and, she was just tapping her foot on the ground like this. And I was like, oh, my gosh, what's wrong? She said she had never flown. And I was like, well, we're going to do that fun then. This is going to be a fun day, not a scary day. And we're going to see it as a gift, and we're going to do it peacefully because I'm not in the mood to be stressed. And she was totally okay with that. And she got on the airplane, and it took off, and we got up into the air. And when she saw the fluffy clouds from the top side, she was like, ooh, take a picture, take a picture. And it's like, we can't. We're not 10,000 feet in the air. We'll get in trouble. And then I thought, what the hell? This is her first time to fly ever. She should get some pictures. So we took pictures. Nobody cares, really, if your phone is on once the people are seated. And she was just in literally heaven, seeing those just huge puffy clouds from the top side. And it is healing. It is healing for people who have been so confined and so restricted in choices and movements. I mean, I really think that you get so far deep into the disease of all of, God, that you've carried for so long since childhood, from different childhood traumas, whether, it is drugs and prostitution and being trafficked and broken and injustice and all of those things. You get so deep into it you can hardly make your way out. And to have this chance to see the world from a beautiful, cloudy perspective gives you a beautiful feeling of healing. And so just in doing the work, just in getting to go, it's healing for individual women. And we've had great success with it over the years. 72% of the women that come in graduate 2.5 years later. They go on to do all kinds of things, work in all kinds of places in our community. They find healing. They make court restitution costs. They get their cars back or get cars for the first time. I mean, there is nothing more healing than seeing a woman at Thistle Farms walk around the first day with a legal license. They have paid back fines. They have passed tests. They have gotten insurance. I mean, it is like a gold card. And the work is healing, and it is empowering. We just had it happen. 3 years it took one of the women to get cleared out of the state of Ohio to get cleared to finally get a license. So yes, it is healing in that way. But I don't think I ever realized how healing it was going to be for me and other members of the community that were coming into it. That we were, in fact, the ones that were starting to experience healing. And I think if you reflect on your own life, in the places maybe that you thought you were coming in to give or to serve, become great sources of healing. And you remember, your own brokenness and your own fears and your own, troubles. One of the best examples for me is I have been worried most of my life about money and about failure. So I want to look like it's going really well all the time. And we had, a couple years ago, NPR came in, excuse me, and they decided we were such a great program, they were going to do a 4-part series on us. And before it aired, one of the women who had been struggling with relapse that they had interviewed as a person struggling with relapse was arrested as part of a homicide. And in 15 years of doing the work, we had had women who had tragically died after relapse. We had never had anybody, that was on the other side of that relapsed and committed such a horrific crime. And especially the one person that had done that had just been interviewed by a national radio program that was getting ready to air it. And I was scared. All my old fears and all the things that I tend to do when I get scared were coming out, and I was like, let's don't tell them. No matter what, let's don't tell NPR. And it's like, you have to tell NPR. And then it was that how could we spin it where it looked better? And we couldn't do anything. It was what it was. And then in my mind, I went to that place, where all your fears come and sit vigil with you in the middle of the night, and 35 women were going to lose their jobs, and we were going to shut down as everybody gets judgmental about the women that we're serving anyway, and that you can do so much, but people don't necessarily change. And what difference does it? All of these things, all of these fears started going into my mind as somehow, that while I want to believe that our small community loves without judgment, the larger community was going to look at us pretty harshly. So NPR aired the story, and they did the whole disclosure about her arrest, and people called in droves, and people cried with us at the brokenness of her story and at our desire to still hope. And that was so healing for me. It was so healing to be able to trust that people could love each other on a larger scale than my little world that I was living in. And I realized that I was getting better, not just from my individual brokenness that I had carried with me from my youth, but in a sense about a larger kind of healing where you could believe that this community could actually love each other. That is healing to believe that, and it was healing for me. Bigger than that, it's healing, I realized, for a whole community, which is, now, from an ordained perspective, you got to remember that is huge to think, wait a minute, it's not about a community coming together to heal 5 women. It's about 5 women coming together to heal a really broken community. That's a switch. And it's been a switch for me to kind of get words around it and to understand what that means. And I mean it on every level. We can now, because of Thistle Farms, we hire 40 women right now are hired at Thistle Farms who are graduates or residents of the program. And on average, women who are residents of Magdalene are arrested about 7 times a year and spend about 7 days per arrest in jail. And you can do the math, and just in cost savings of arrest and incarceration, it's over $300,000 a year saving to the city of Nashville. In addition, with the court restitution costs and the costs of paying back old child support and the costs of all the women who are paying taxes and all the taxes we are collecting when we are selling products in the great state of Tennessee and the city of Nashville, and with the 110 cities that came to visit us this year to learn about our model, and if you think about all the children who would be in custody and are now living with their moms, and if you think about all the money the women spend right here in Nashville when they get their paycheck at Thistle Farms and generally don't make it down Charlotte without spending some of it, you're talking about close to $1 million a year we gift back to this city. We take no federal or state funds. It's a gift. That's amazing, right? Yay, that's amazing. How healing and beautiful is that in a really practical way? We talk about our budget in the city and all of these costs, and here is this beautiful, sweet little community coming together to help 5 women, and you realize, my Lord, what a gift to this whole city of Nashville. What a healing presence it is. The other way that it feels so healing to me is it keeps generating and spinning off new communities. So it's not just Nashville, it's the whole world. The reason that we are right now opening a cafe at the end of our building in Nashville on May 24th at 11 o'clock a.m., if you're interested, the reason we're doing that is so many people are coming to us literally, metaphorically, spiritually, physically hungry. People are coming to us hungry. They're hungry to learn about a model that is this old and this reviving. They are hungry to figure out how in North Platte, Nebraska, in New Orleans, Louisiana, in St. Louis, Missouri, and in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and in Charleston, South Carolina, in Rochester, New York, how can they start their communities? Yesterday, I got an email. The dean of the cathedral in Honolulu, one of his parishioners, who happens to be a social worker, is working with a young woman who is 17 years old, who needs a place to go. She has the same history of so many women we serve. Raped early, good old drug addiction, and on the streets by the time you're 14 or 15 years old. She has nowhere to go. And they email me, can she come to you in Magdalene? Now, do you think that is almost crazy? That you're out there on the island of Honolulu and you're calling Nashville, Tennessee to try to find some sanctuary for a young woman that is so broken she'll do anything. And there's nowhere for her to go any closer that they can imagine. This world is so desperate for the healing of those 5 women that started a long time ago. One of the other things that has happened in this work is that you realize how much all of us need to hope in this healing. that it's not an exchange that happens where one person receives and one person that gives, but that we hope for this thing that washes over all of us. It saves us from cynicism. It saves us from the trap of rhetoric that I think poisons a community and makes us sicker. One of the ideas I've been thinking about lately a lot is this idea of people calling things tough on crime, and how really longer and longer sentences for the women that we are serving, that we have seen over the years, is so not tough on crime. It is expensive. We should call it expensive on crime. That would be what we should call it. We should change the rhetoric. Let's do the most expensive approach to crime we can do. Let's endanger the women in the communities that they're in by longer and longer sentences, so that when you come out in 14 years and you've lost everything and you've lost all connection, you can go back to the one person who probably will still see you, which is the dealer, if they're out. Instead, I keep thinking that the toughest thing on crime we can do is face the issues, really face what we're dealing with as a community, really want healing. That is so brave and tough. It is so brave and tough to say, we are going to talk in an honest way about child sexual abuse. We are going to talk about the issues of racism and poverty in our communities. We are going to talk about how insidious drug and prostitution rings can be, and how it pulls people in, and how to really face those so that we're all safer and more healing. One of the early things that happened for us in Magdalene is we were befriended by a number of people in the police department. Thank you for being here. That is so sweet. And, Ronald Serpis was huge in that. He was the chief of police, and he really saw what we were doing as being a very tough approach to the issues around trafficking and prostitution. So tough that people were actually, walking off the streets forever. How tough is that? Walking off the streets and staying off the streets even after you face really continual challenges and obstacles in your life. And he was such a believer in what we were doing that if he ever, to this day, he won't accept honorariums, but if people give him an honorarium, he says, make it out to Magdalene. And he still sends it our way, and he was instrumental in helping the people in New Orleans get their first house open. That's a sister program to what we're doing. So what about the idea that a group of women coming off the streets can actually be our healers? And when I say our, I mean all of us sitting in this room. I mean people who have known addiction themselves, people who have been in helping professions. All of those folks together are feeling this hope and this sense of joy. And part of the reason that I know it's working is that I am now something like 20, my son is 22. Okay, I'm 22 years ordained. And I am of that group of people now in ordained clergy. You get to that point, and the stories you hear among my peers are people walk out of the pulpit and they don't come back. That they get really burnt out by the institution or by congregational lives and demands, and they get profoundly burnt out. Like they keep going, and then they walk, and they're like, I'm done. Like, I'm done. And my issue, and anybody that works with me at either the chapel or at Thistle Farms or Magdalene, I think will say this is true. My issue is that I go to bed with more ideas than I woke up with. That I have continually been inspired on this journey of healing. That it's like, oh, let's do a cafe. That's a great idea. And let's go raise another $500,000 for that. That sounds fun. Oh, I know, let's do a national conference. So in October, we're doing our very first national conference here. I want to write another book. I know, let's start a shared trade alliance and combine all the social enterprises whose workforce is the mission globally together into an alliance. So we just bought all the domain names so we could start a big alliance. I mean, ideas keep coming because there's so much power in the healing that washes over a community. So I know that we're going to have a little bit of conversation, and we're going to have some talk about, just whatever this is making you think about. But I want to end with just one more quick story. And that story is just a few weeks ago, I went to Pensacola with a woman named Doris. And beyond the idea of flight, this was Doris's first time to ever see the ocean. And one of the people that lived in Pensacola told Doris she still hadn't seen the ocean. That was the Gulf. But for all intents and purposes, we just say she saw the ocean. I mean, it has it's an ocean. And Doris has, like many of the women in Magdalene Thistle Farms, has such a humbling story, and it's profoundly rich, and it is a pearl. And she has chosen to share that pearl with many, many people who can hear that story and see her not just as, a survivor, but as a healer, that she is so joyful and she has so much to offer. I mean, she wears Christmas sweaters, and she would wear them all year long. She sings while she works, and she tells funny stories about laughing so hard her eyelashes fall off. She's great. I mean, she's just a joy to be around, and I got to go with her to Pensacola when she explained that she had never seen the ocean. So we didn't get there till about 7 o'clock at night or 7:30, and it was already getting dark. But that's still plenty of time, right? And I'm like, come on, Doris, let's go see the ocean. And she was too afraid to go. That the nighttime was not a safe place for her. Just like for many of the women, you think we're going to do these exercise programs and everybody's going to walk, and it's like, walking is not safe for me. Walking is not a happy memory. Nighttime is not a happy memory for Doris. So I said, you have to promise when the sun comes up, you'll go. Although I assured her if we went out there at night that the sharks generally don't crawl up the beach so far that they bite your ankles or anything, that she would be safe. So the next morning, literally at sunrise, I was like, come on, Doris, we gotta go see the beach. And she walked out there, and what a privilege to be the person that gets to hold her hand when her feet touch those sugar sands for the first time, right? How healing is that for everybody that's watching it? And there's pictures of Doris just throwing her head back, and she said she was so excited she let me take pictures of her without her wig on, which is huge. But she didn't want to get it messed up. And then she had commented that God did a really good job. And then she said she wished it would have been bluer. And then as her feet were in the sands and the waves started coming over her feet, and she felt that for the first time, the pull of a tide, she said in a rhetorical lilt, has this been doing this my whole life? As long as the moon has been spinning around this sun, around our planet, the tide has been pulling us in and out and in and out. We just have to get down to the shore to feel it and to see it and experience it as real. And that's what healing is like for me on this journey. It's been there the whole time. We just have to come together and come down to the shore to experience it.
So I'm thinking about Honolulu and that story, because as you say, how it seems so crazy that a girl in Honolulu might need to come to Nashville to find somewhere where she can be healed and be safe. So, I mean, and I'm just trying to figure out how that could be. And I put it slightly a different way. I mean, in Nashville, we've got lots and lots of churches. And churches are communities. And you'd think that with all these wonderful, caring communities here and in other parts of the world, there would be, the Thistle Farm would be just like normal. I mean, I'm just, why, so I guess I'm trying to figure out, because when you describe what's happened there and what you've been part of, it makes so much sense. People come together, especially people who have suffered and who know what the backside of life is like, and they support each other, and they grow with each other, and they connect with each other, and they create it with each other. I mean, it makes so much sense. So why is it not happening everywhere? And especially, why isn't it happening in churches where you'd think? So I'm thinking I'm going to dream tonight when I go to bed, of the next project for you, which is I know you need another one,
Yes.
which is why couldn't every church have a Thistle Farm attached to it in Nashville? A small one. I mean, why not? Wouldn't that be sort of obvious?
There is this sense of, in a lot of ways, churches have surrendered a lot of what community was about, whether it's, weddings are no longer on Sunday mornings or, in the middle of a worship in, any congregation or temple. But now it becomes, you kind of lost it, and we lost it a long time ago, and now it's like, billions of dollar industry on Saturdays where it becomes like a fashion show kind of thing, and we've done it on funerals. We've lost so much theology and community aspect of what funerals were even about and how those worked over the last, 100 or so years. But this is a really, really old model, and we've kind of lost this idea of community healing in the same way. So that this is like a Benedictine model, or a model of people coming together without authority for free to offer radical hospitality. And so the models that have taken over are, again, this is not judging any of the other models, it's just not the communal healing model, which is, there's treatment centers and there's halfway houses where you pay $150. And for this particular group of people, those models are not sufficient, not sufficient, because of, one, is if you've never worked, if you went to the streets at 14 or 15 and you go to a halfway house, one is the authority itself. Somebody says you have to be in at 6 and you have to and you have to, well, you just ask him for a fight. And then the other reason is if you have to get $150 a week and you don't have a job, you have to hustle to get the $150, and you can't stay clean if you have to hustle. So take away all of that and you're left with just a community. And I think it's hard for us to trust that healing happens in community. Just being in community is healing. That's a hard thing in some ways because it doesn't sound professional enough. But it's true that there's a healing element to that. And the second thing is, people go pretty quickly to, well, what about the dangers of this, or what about the liabilities of this, or what about the cost for this? And none of it, at least in my mind, has been true, that we haven't had any of those liability issues ever. And we've never had any of the violence that people worry about, or we've never had, all these fears that people have that keep them from doing this stuff don't even feel real to me in many ways. We have 2.5 million people in our penal system. Over 80% of those folks have pretty significant addictions. If you look at the last 3 years of research, we just were at a conference in New Mexico. Over 90% of the women in that system have suffered one or more significant childhood traumas. And when you've suffered one, you're set up for the next one and the next one and the next one, and that vulnerability. So if you have a parent that dies, or if you have poverty, or if you have, any of these number of factors, it sets you up for, even, abuse and dropout rates, or whatever the thing is that progresses and you are setting people up for incarceration. Anyway, with that 2.5 million people and 7 million people, if you count everybody on probation, that long-term free communal housing for women is literally the numbers in the hundreds of options. So we constantly have, a waiting list that is so overwhelming that we put the number at 100, but it doesn't mean anything. It could be 1,000 if we just kept listing.
I'm fascinated by, when you started doing the math, and you explained just how much money we're saving Nashville every year and so on. I mean, one really hard-nosed way of looking at what you're doing is that, and if you think about the incarceration business, well, it is a business, but I mean the savings are like $35,000 a year, I don't know what it is for an inmate being in jail.
For women to be in prison in the state of Tennessee is $86,000 a year per person is the number that the Department of Correction puts on that.
Oh my goodness, okay.
So if you have a 14-year sentence, it's over $1 million we spend per person.
So what I'm thinking is our current system is incredibly expensive and inefficient. And the sort of thing that you're talking about would, if it was allowed to work its way through, would actually be so much cheaper. And so leaving aside whether it's better or not, it would be. So you start thinking, well, where do the attitudes come from that insist on this sort of punitive regime that leads to this incarceration? And I was reminded of your talking about your whole community being non-judgmental. And our society tends to be really very judgmental. 3 strikes and you're no, it's all right. You're out. And I'm thinking maybe we kind of need more generally to change our judgmental attitudes and try and look at the causes of things and get at them. So I'd be interested in your response to that, and also how these women respond to maybe for the first time being in a situation in which they're not being judged. This must be, for some of them, just unbelievable.
I don't know, you'd have to ask Katrina or Ronza probably that question about how it feels to be in the community, because I haven't lived in any of the houses, nor ever had a key to any of the homes that we have. But I do feel like, if we could think about the word radical as being the word rooted, that the most radical is the most rooted, and you get back to like the most deepest roots that we have is the most radical, not like fringe off here, but deep, deep, deep. Or even the idea of conservative and being conservative and conserving our principles, our deepest principles. So to be radical and conservative would be to look at our deepest roots that conserve our best practices, and surely in humanity that is love, that is non-judgmental, that is radical and conservative and as deep as you could get. But I don't know that people necessarily use those words in that context. But that would be my hope, is that we are part of bearing witness to what that looks like, that we really do try to practice that in general about loving each other in that kind of radical way that preserves us for each other, so that we're safe for each other, and so that we can go for healing and be a part of each other's lives, for men and women. I mean, men and women need that. Men and women need places where they feel that kind of acceptance, so that they can get better. So I can get better, so you can get better. That's what I think.
Let's open this to the floor, and there's a question right up there. Yeah, there's a microphone just behind you.
In my observation of the different programs and models around Nashville, Thistle Farms is probably the very best you could get. But there are still a lot of churches that do this type of work pretty successfully, aren't there? Like Christ Church, isn't that a good model?
Which Christ Church? I mean, there's like 20 Christ churches. I don't know which one you mean.
Oh. It's about 5 miles south of Nashville. I think it's on Old Hickory.
Oh no, that's that's Christ Church Pentecostal on Old Hickory Boulevard. But there's
No,
the one he's talking about is on Old Hickory Boulevard.
Yeah, I think so. It's on
I
a
know which
steep
one
hill.
you're talking about.
Yeah. They have like 47 or 40-some ladies there.
Yeah, and I thought it was that they were part of, I know the name of it, Teens for Mission.
Yeah, I can't remember the name.
It's called,
But the point is, there are a lot
Yes,
of
there's
others
a lot
here
of
that are
different models.
successful, right?
you know, I think, again, you're going to be, for what I'm trying to talk about is a particular population of people. I think for underage runaways, it's a very different grouping, and it's a very not a different set of issues, but the complexity of how you address those, and you know, just even the what do you call it when you have to get approval from the state? The licensure is very different. And that, I think, is one of the areas that Christ Church has focused on, the one on Old Hickory Boulevard. Teen Challenge, that's what it's called, Teen Challenge. And I think that's the one that houses that, and they go to, like, we have several women that go and speak in their home turf is, Clemmy and Regina go every year, Katrina. What's the name of that place? Anyway, it's in Ohio, it's in Oklahoma, wherever they go or something like that. But yeah, it's a beautiful model, and I am grateful for, we have tons of partnerships in Nashville, tons. I mean, the Rape and Sexual Abuse Center is one of the most great partners that we've had in years and years. When OIC has done great things in helping women do computer skills, I mean, there's been a lot of groups that have come together to help.
Okay.
Thank you for your narrative. There are, I think, two things that are on my mind. I've been a prison chaplain since 1967 and was a prison chaplain at Tennessee State Penitentiary. And then I was at the
amazing.
women's prison in mental health as a mental health. And I know at least one of our women left and ended up at Magdalen House and was in the documentary. And I finished my sentence at Charles Bass Annex, so that's my narrative. One is the prisoner reentry issue is a burning issue for us, for me personally, because I'm still heavily involved at Riverbend and in the Tennessee Department of Correction, mentoring released inmates. Our church, Trinity Presbyterian Church, funds that so that they have the support of someone coming out who will be in the halfway house, and they don't have to foot the bill of that $150 and $100 a week at the house we use. So I really promote prisoner reentry. The other is, and I'll finish with a question, is are you going to be speaking at a year of rethinking prisons at Vanderbilt this weekend? This is 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Okay, let me promote that. It's called A Year of Rethinking Prisons. David's colleague, Lisa Gunther, has created this. A lot of people from nationwide. I'm going to be speaking on prison recidivism on Sunday from 2:30. It's in Buttrick Hall. And I'm with the Tennessee Consultation on Criminal Justice, and our mantra is be smart on crime as opposed to tough on crime. That's our mantra for the Tennessee Consultation on Criminal Justice. Now, my question back to you with a question would be, do you take any women, as most of them are coming from the streets, do you take any from prison directly who have the histories?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, just if anybody's leaving, I see people leaving, just a plug, because I would be a horrible person if I didn't say this. Go by the Thistle Farms table. Mother's Day is right around the corner. I know you haven't finished all you need to do for Mother's Day. You have women that you need to buy for, and we are making it easy for you. So just go by there on your way out and pick up a couple things for yourself or for somebody else in your life to honor Mother's Day. Yes.
This is a short way to ask a question. What happens after Thistle Farms? You've now been in operation long enough that you have alumni. Do you have like a good college fund and Vanderbilt's development office that keeps track of all of us? What do you do for graduates for some continuing sense of belonging?
I don't really do anything. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and it really happens among the graduates themselves who have formed deep bonds, and they call it Sisters for Life, and they have everything from monthly gatherings to Facebook pages they're all posting on all the time, and they're family really. And people, we don't lose track either, because there's 2 graduates who are helping run the entire residential piece of the program, Regina and Sheila, and then there's 10 women who run every department of Thistle Farms except running just the whole administration side of it, who are all graduates of the program who keep up with everything. I think it's a pretty close-knit community, and everybody's friends on Facebook, and it just happens. It's really good. Yes, ma'am.
This is a form of criticism, not of your program, but of the church. I discovered this for the first time in 1958. Whenever there's a problem, no matter how small or how big, the church is the last one to step forward. They quite often have to be drugged and kicking and screaming to do what they should have been doing, at least known about it and doing it in the first place. They don't like that to be told, but most of you, I'm sure in here, know that. You might not would admit it, you might not like hearing me say it, but it's true.
Well, you said it with a lot of conviction. Say that again?
She went to start in school, and she was going to a community center during the weekend. On that Thursday night, they sent me a note saying she couldn't come. They were going to do a sleepover. And they said it was because she was colored. So then I found out this is one on Monroe Street. It's by the Methodist Church. Thank God I'm Methodist, so I knew I wasn't going to have no problem. Everybody from the janitor all the way up to the upper room told me no, she couldn't because she was colored.
I am so
Thank you.
sorry.
The church is the last one that steps up, and they should be stepping up first.
That's horrible.
Thank you.
I had to explain to a 6-year-old why she couldn't go so that she would not think all white people were like that.
I wanted to address David's question or comment about leaving an island to go to the mainland to, there's a lot of issues, mental health issues, addiction issues, even personal forms of behavior that people will break the habit or change their location in order to try and escape from the entraining behavior, the people that might be involved that might drag you back down. And I even say this about our society itself, that we try to distract ourselves out of our problems. What we need to do, I believe, is to turn inward and face our fears, which is not easy. If you're afraid of the dark or you're afraid of a plane, it's very hard to face those fears, but that's the essence of healing, is facing those fears with a community, as you're capable of doing, to address those fears and heal from within, as opposed to the escaping behavior, which a lot of us do tend to use for
That's right.
getting away from a disease. I just want to make that comment.
Hi, Becca. You did a great job today.
Thank you.
I know in your book, Snake Oil, available for sale now at the table in the back, you talked about your own personal childhood abuse. And I just wonder, after hearing all that you've done for Thistle Farms and for healing women, do you still find healing in your own life? Even though it's been years and you've been doing so much, do you still get your own personal healing? Is that still possible, even after this point?
even think about it. Isn't that funny? That's horrible. I probably should. Let me think. Yes, I'm going to say yes because I feel like, you know, sometimes if you know the right answer, it's hard to be honest and to see if you're doing the honest answer or the right answer if you already know the right answer. Do y'all ever get that way? The right answer is yes, so I will pick yes on that. Carolyn Snell does so much for Magdalene and Thistle Farms. But I would say that, you know, the way that it works, she's talking about when I was little, had a couple years of sexual abuse in my life, and wrote about that in one of the recent books and what that journey of healing had looked like for me. And I would say that the process of coming out into all of that and going through therapy and going through all that stuff was very healing. And some of that feels like a memory for me. It just feels like sometimes I have to go back and remember it. But I can still know that it's part of the healing journey, because when I hear a story of that happening to another child, I can feel it rising in me still. And so I know it's still there because I can feel it, that. You can feel like that's, you know, you just get outraged again on behalf of somebody, or you get a feeling of like, you know, this is so bad, everybody needs to stop what they're doing, we've got to figure this out together. So I would say that it's still part, my own healing is still connected to the stories I hear, and that's where I feel, you know, connected still.
I don't know, is this on? You talked about partnerships with other groups in the community. Are the 12-step programs part of the women's
Absolutely.
Healings?
Everybody is on, you know, on a 12-step journey. That's a part of the communities of Magdalene and Thistle Farms, and everybody has home groups outside of Magdalene. So your home group, where you go to do your basic meetings, happen outside the house. Somebody said to me the other day, it was really neat, the first 90 days you're at Magdalene, if the van is moving, you're moving. In other words, you have to be going to a meeting every day. If the van leaves the house, you need to be on it. And you get more choices as time goes on, but at the beginning, the 12 steps are such a big part of people's lives. And if you come to Thistle Farms and come sit in our meditation circle, the very first thing you hear is, you know, us sitting in a circle reciting the Serenity Prayer together.
Fred, I think we've run out of time, except we will have a little bit of time just to go to that table and buy some of those gifts.
Have you gotten anything for Mother's Day yet?
I'm going back there.
I was just worried because I know you're busy. I know you're so busy.
Not too busy. I want to thank Becca for a really wonderful lunchtime talk. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.